some perspectives on the markets, if you can give any perspective on a market as crazy as this one, our Fox panel.
Yeah, perspective or yelling. All right, we promise we'll try and keep the lasso on them. But can we blame these losses on the Fed? The Fed, who valiantly tried to jump in with a 3/4 point rate cut yesterday?
Because they wouldn't have had to do it if they didn't screw it up in the first place. Absolutely. All goes back to they took the Fed funds rate from 1% to 5.25% inside of 3 years. That's a 525% increase in 3 years. What do you think is going to happen? All the adjustable mortgages got crushed. All of a sudden, people didn't have as much money. They couldn't spend as much. The financial stocks took a beating, and that led this whole decline.
And Peter, they left the Fed funds rate at 1% for a full year. Was that if you have to focus on one mistake, was that the worst?
Well, they should have never lowered them in the first place. You know, they blew up this housing bubble. See, the problem with the economy is, you know, for years, Americans were under the delusion that they won the lottery. They thought their home equity was actually real wealth, and they borrowed trillions of dollars against it and spent it. And now we owe all this money on all these adjustable rate mortgages, and people are waking up to the reality that that was an illusion, that they didn't have that money, but now they have debts that they can't afford. We had a whole economy based on spending money we didn't have, and it is tumbling. And there's nothing the Fed can do to stop the market from falling. They can't stop stocks from falling. This is a bear market. It's going to get a lot worse, especially if you value things in real money. The Dow is now down 70% since 2000, priced in gold.
You know,
the NASDAQ's
Mike,
doing even worse.
The U.S. dollar, some people are starting to look at it and say, I remember the Deutschmark where we needed a wheelbarrow just to buy some schnitzel, you know? I mean,
well, that might be happening with the dollar soon.
But the dollar is weak, and it gets weaker every time the Fed cuts. Mike.
It's going to get a lot weaker.
Hold on, Peter. Did you hear me say Mike?
Listen, the foreign exchange value of a nation's currency is not the reflection of economic health. If that were the case, then we wouldn't be holding up these countries like Japan and China to try to emulate them, to replicate their policies exactly. Look, if anyone's delusional here, it's Peter Schiff who keeps repeating the same thing. The dollar has had zero impact on the growth of household wealth in this nation. We stand at the top of all nations in the world. Our household net worth almost $60 trillion. That is assets minus liabilities.
It's a bubble. The assets don't count. We got to pay.
What do you mean the assets don't count? Of course they count. Are you out of your mind? The assets absolutely count, and they're adjusted for inflation. Look,
the assets are not real.
Hold on a second. Hold on. Let me bring it out of that fight for a second. You're on. You know, the fact is that a lot of the problems that Peter points to and Mike points to and Tom points to are real. There were some mistakes that were made, but still, you are here. You weren't born in the United States. A lot of people are coming to the U.S. because this is the country where you can make something of yourself that you can't anywhere else.
Absolutely. Look, I still believe that this is the greatest country in the world and still is the freest country in the world to do business. It could be freer. It could be better. It needs to be freer. It needs to be better. And if we continue on the path we're on right now, things are going to get worse. Things have to get worse. If we continue spending like there's no tomorrow, if we continue printing money, if we lower interest rates, a ridiculously low interest rate like they did in 2001 and so on, if we continue bailing out, what do you think the decrease yesterday by the Fed was basically a bailout of the banking system? They lowered interest rates to steepen the yield curve to bail out all these banks that made bad decisions. They need to suffer the
consequences. The lender of last resort.
So, Gary Calbon,
they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. People should suffer the consequences.
Gary, the Fed, as the banker of last resort, will soften the blow of what would have been a depression, making it just a recession?
My problem is I just don't think the Fed has any control whatsoever. I think they have been a year behind the curve and everything, and they are just now playing catch-up. You know, this 3/4 of a point move took them down to 3.5, but you have the 2-year, I think, down in 2 and change right now, so they definitely have more to go. Look, there is enough to go around as far as blame to the Fed, but the Fed did not make the people at Citigroup and all these other places come out with these bad loans and fictitious loans, didn't make the lenders commit crimes, didn't make the borrowers go out there and accept money even though they weren't able to pay things back. Everybody is to blame at this point in time. And by the way, how much Red Bull are you serving these guys today over there?
Watching the Fed cut the Fed funds rate is almost like watching a skinny brother go on a diet for his fat 300-pound sister. The problem here is that the government does spend too much. We do tax too much, and that leads the Fed to do these stupid things. And the biggest problem is the Fed is a bunch of 1930s economists in a 21st century economy. It's all screwed up.
You guys think it's the Fed's job to stop
Gary,
the market from falling.
Gary,
real estate
I have
prices
news for all of you. If the market rallies 1,000 points from here, everybody will start applauding the Fed again. We're all beholden to the markets and all the news that comes out every day.
I will not applaud the Fed.
Neither will I.
And I know Peter won't.
I will.
Never.
By the way, it's not up 1,000 points,
You
but we
guys
should
are-
mention
you-
that the Dow Jones Industrial Average is now up over 80. Well, it's up 79 points right now.
Go ahead, Peter.
You guys are looking for the Fed to reflate a phony economy. Stock prices are going to go a lot lower. Real estate prices
This is
have
not
to
a
go a
phony
lot lower.
Peter?
The Fed can't do anything about it.
Peter?
The Fed is the
I
one that-
lived, to Yoron's point, I
Peter?
lived for 10 years in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, Switzerland, one of the highest per capita income countries in the world. And I have to tell you
Too
this.
bad you didn't learn anything when you were over there.
Yes, I did. The
Peter?
average Swiss lives nowhere near the level of the average American.
average
They live in
American is
small.
living
They
a
don't
phony
own their own
standard.
home. Excuse me.
Mike,
they
we
don't
have
own their.
borrowed a
Excuse me.
fortune. It's a
I'm
phony
speaking here.
prosperity.
Peter, hold on.
Excuse
Hold on,
me.
Peter.
They don't own their own homes. Only wealthy people own their own
Americans
homes. They
don't own
live in
them either.
small
The
apartments. They don't
Chinese
have
own them. It's the
anywhere
Saudis
near
own them.
the amount of.
But that's all true, and that's what we need to keep. That's what we need
We're
to keep.
keeping it.
To do that,
You know what?
You don't have stimulus packages that are going to
Look,
inflate
Yoron,
and increase
in
the
a-
deficit.
in a-
What you
in a-
need to do is
Gentlemen, very quickly. Very quickly,
Look,
Gary.
all I know is Peter's been saying this economy's been stinking for the last 50 years.
No,
So
I
don't know
haven't been
where-
saying
yes,
it for
you
50
have.
years. I've been
you were on
saying
the
it
show
for-
with me 2 weeks ago and you said the economy hasn't been good for 50
It has
years.
been
you
bad.
said that.
It's
And I
been a
thought Gary was
disaster.
going to be the
Why don't you
peacemaker.
wake up? You know,
Hey,
so how